You're listening to Words vs. Words with Friends podcast, a fun interactive podcast where we challenge your mind and perspective using everyday words and phrases. You haven't heard a podcast like this before. It's more than a discussion, it's a debate. Now let's join hosts Joeleen Santiago and Shemeka Montgomery for an all-new episode.
Hi, welcome to Words vs. Words with Friends podcast. This is a fun, interactive podcast where we challenge your mind and perspective using everyday words and phrases. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate you being here. I'm your host, Joeleen Santiago, and I have my co-host here, Shemeka Montgomery.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight to Words vs. Words with Friends podcast. We're so excited to be back again this week. We have another awesome topic tonight, boundary versus limit. Words vs. Words with Friends is a podcast created to bring back the real art of conversation. We're going to create dialogue and also help you think outside the box. So for tonight, we have a boundary versus limit. For boundary, we have a real or imagined line that marks the edge or limit of something, a limit of a subject or sphere of activity. And for limit, we have a restriction on the size or amount of something permissible or possible, something that bounds, restrains, or confines. So, Joe, tonight with boundary and limit, we want to talk about, are there boundaries or limits when it comes to sharing? We have a few scenarios tonight. We have a scripture we're going to dissect. We're asking for your feedback and for your perspective on tonight's scenarios. So for our first scenario, let's jump into it, Joe. So our very first one, we have sharing toys. We have loaning money. So as a child, a lot of times we are taught to share our toys. And so it was really interesting, Joe, your perspective that you had on this when we teach our kids how to share. I want you to give me a little bit of perspective on what your thoughts on about that.
You know, so very often we teach our children, to share when they're little, share. It's a good thing. Sharing is good. And I totally agree. Sharing is great. And we teach our kids, it's okay to share, we teach them to have a good heart, to share with others. But then I was wondering, is there a time where there should be a boundary or a limit on items that we share, things that we share? You know what I'm saying? So one time, I was working, because I worked for education for a very long time, and I saw, a little kid, he did not want to share his toy, right? And so the teacher was like, you know what, it's okay, he doesn't have to. And so, because it was something that was so meaningful, something that was so personal to him, that item meant so much to him, that he didn't have to share it. Now, I don't know what your take is on that, Shemeka. And if you're tuning into Facebook, what is your take on that? Is there a limitation, or is there a boundary as to how much or when we should share something?
Mm-hmm. We want to say hello to all the listeners. I saw Tiffany pop up. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are so excited to have your comments and your feedback. So, Joe, to address that, I thought it was really interesting because I've never really looked at that. Your perspective is very interesting when it comes to sharing toys, because you are right. There could be a toy that is very sentimental to the child. Maybe they had a parent who passed away. Maybe they had a relative who passed away and left them a certain item. And then we come along and we say, well, you need to share it with somebody else because you don't need to be selfish. But if you really think about it, sometimes you have to have a boundary. Sometimes you have to start early giving kids boundaries so that when you grow up as an adult, you can have those skills and you can learn how to have boundaries. So I think sometimes looking at that perspective is very different. I never really looked at it that way until you mentioned that. I just thought it was very interesting how, when it comes to kids, it's not necessarily that they have to share every single item that they have. Because if you really think about it, if you teach them that, then does that mean as they grow up that they feel like they have to share everything? Then it turns into that scenario of sharing money. somebody asking you for money. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you teach them that early, does it turn into that as they become older?
So, like in this case, Shemeka, is there a boundary or a limit when it comes to sharing?
hmm
What do you
I
think? What
think
are your
that
thoughts?
I think there should be a boundary. You should have healthy boundaries for yourself, because when it comes to sharing items, those are your personal items. So to me, like I was saying, if you have something that's very sentimental to you that you don't want to share with anybody else, I don't think that you should have to. So when it comes to boundaries, I think it starts early that we should teach kids to have boundaries so that when they do become older, they won't have those issues setting those boundaries as they get older.
hmm So Tiffany said, if we can get that back up, please. Tiffany said boundaries are set for sharing because some people just don't respect space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very good. Thank you, Tiffany, for that. That's so true because, if you think about it, we want to be able to respect somebody's items, and if we are always saying, okay, you can share, you can have whatever you want, go ahead and I'm going to let you, or some people feel free to go ahead and take, especially like family members. I'm just gonna throw it out there, but and people who are close to you, maybe they feel like, hey, you know what, I'm entitled to this because I'm close to you, so I can feel like I should be able to come and take whatever I want. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to respect the person's property. And when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
small children, when it comes to children, what's gonna happen when that toy breaks? What's going to happen, that something that could have been very expensive, now it's broken and that parent doesn't want to pay for it.
That's very true. That's very
hmm
true. So I think when it comes to, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say what I think it comes when it comes to boundaries with kids. I think that a lot of times, we can look at it a little bit differently and just show them, it's okay. Like if you don't want to share a certain item, you can make that choice. It's up to you whether you want to share that item or not.
hmm Okay, so what happens when you become an adult? You know, should there be limitations and boundaries as far as sharing items? Like, should there be things that you just should not share? Like, think about it, Shamika. If you had something that was so personal, meant so much to you, let's
Mhm.
just say your car, for example, right? Are you just going to loan your car out? And would you just loan it out to a family member or somebody who's close to you? Just, maybe they don't have one, or, maybe they feel like they're entitled because they're close to you.
No, so for me, no. I don't think that you should have to loan out items or share items even as an adult. I think that's when those boundaries do come in place. Those items belong to you. You worked hard for those items, and I think that when it comes to that, you can set your own boundaries when it's up to that. So let's just say they want to borrow your car. Maybe you don't want to let them borrow the car, but maybe a boundary could be, hey, do you need to go somewhere? I can take you, on this certain day between these certain times. Maybe those are boundaries that you can set instead of letting them use your car, maybe instead.
But is that a boundary or is that a limit? Because I see that as a limit. Because when you're saying like no, like there's restrictions, and when you say like no, you can't drive my car, to me, that's a limit. That's not a boundary. A boundary could be like, well, maybe instead of you driving a long distance, maybe you can drive it from point A to point B. Maybe you could just drive it down the store, down the street to the store, down the street to Walmart because it's right around the corner. So to me, I think that that is a boundary because you're setting perimeters. You
But
know,
that's the,
um,
but that's the thing. So if you decided on certain days that they could borrow the car, or certain times of the day that they could borrow the car, I think that's where the boundaries come in.
So like so Tiffany has a comment. She says, as an adult, you almost have to take the stance of don't loan or lend what you can't afford to give away. As adults, they are most definitely boundaries.
hmm
Okay, so for me, I see it as a limit. If I'm not willing to do something, like for me, boundaries is more like negotiable. It's more flexible. Like I have flexibility with boundaries. With
hmm
limitations and limits, no is no, and you're not changing my mind. So if I say no, you're not driving my car, you're not driving my car. That's the only vehicle I have. And if you mess it up, what's gonna happen next?
hmm So basically, no is an answer within itself. I like to use that a lot because that is true. That is a boundary that you can set for yourself, and it needs no explanation. So if you have something that belongs to you and you do not want to loan it out or let somebody borrow it, that is totally up to you. Because guess what? You have to take care of yourself first. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes when it goes back to teaching kids how to share toys and things like that, I think sometimes when we teach those kids that, sometimes it affects them as they get older, and they think that, they forget how to take care of themselves, and they think they have to give everything away, and I think sometimes, we forget how to take care of ourselves and put ourselves first, because we were shamed possibly for not sharing items that we had or sharing
Mhm.
toys that we had. So that negative emotion is associated with it. So then as we get older and people ask us for things, then we start to feel bad, because as a
Mhm.
child, we were, parents got onto us or teachers got onto us because we weren't sharing, and they said that
Mhm.
we were being selfish. Whereas
So
when we got older, we have to learn how to take care of ourselves.
so it's like you're forcing somebody to do something they really don't wanna do.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So, I you have to be able to learn we have to be able to teach our kids how to, about boundaries and limits because,
Mhm.
we can teach them, "Hey, it's not okay to share this, but it's okay to share that." You know what I mean? Because I
Mhm.
had to do that. I had to do that with my own kids. "Hey, there are certain things that you can share, like your, um, PlayStations, Game Boys and that, like, those are things you can't share like that. Those are things, like, because they
Mhm.
cost money, but there are other things that maybe possibly you could share, you know what I'm saying? So, I had to
Mhm.
teach them how to, have boundaries and limits when it came to, like, personal items.
And even I was thinking about boundaries with kids and things like that. If you think about it, when kids grow up, I don't have children, but when you have kids, you have a playpen, so they are in a boundary. You have them in a
Mm,
stroller, so they are in a boundary. You have them with the little leashes, like when you're going out, so you don't get lost. You have them within a boundary. So kids are taught from an early age to have those boundaries. I just think it needs to be a healthy balance between the two. Like you
mhm,
said, if it's items that are very expensive that are going to be hard for their parents to replace, then yeah, there are certain items that they cannot play with. Also,
mhm,
something else I looked at was, also it was talking about how when kids see other relatives and family members, how they're forced to hug the parent or grandparent because they haven't seen them for so long. That within itself is a boundary too. If you think
mhm,
about it, yeah, it's nice to speak and say hello, but there are things, kids are affected by certain things, and they should be able to make a choice between, if they give this person a
mhm,
hug, you know what I'm saying, you have to teach them those physical boundaries too, because there
mm.
are boundaries that kids need. There are certain parts that cannot be touched, you know what I'm saying, so you have to teach them those boundaries as well.
That's so good. We force our kids to speak to strangers, and yet we say, strangers are bad," you know what I'm saying? So
Exactly.
Tiffany
Hmm.
had a comment up just a little bit ago. I want to go ahead and read that, please. She said, "Great point on the history of being shamed for not sharing. Never thought of it like that." Thank you so much, Tiffany, for that. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, definitely. We're made to feel bad about things, bad about our decisions, especially when it comes to like sharing items. And then when
Hmm.
we get older, we always feel guilty. We always feel bad because we feel like we're mean. We feel like we're rude and we feel like we're a bad person. Like, you know, oh my God, like, hey, I said no to a person, and saying no
Hmm.
is okay.
It is. It
Definitely.
really is. That's something I had to learn myself, because really you're respecting yourself, you're respecting your own boundaries and your limits when it comes to how you react to people. You don't have to say yes to everything just
Mhm.
because somebody asks you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, you just don't. That is your God given right to say yes or
Mhm.
say no, you know?
Right.
So I think as an adults, we just have to remember that.
Mhm. So is it better to have boundaries or limits?
I think it's better to have boundaries.
You think boundaries?
I do.
I I think in certain situations boundaries are okay, but I think limits are I would say limits would be better. I mean, in my opinion, or it can even just depend on the situation. I feel that
Mhm.
with boundaries, there's a form of trust that goes with that. And I think maybe we have to put limits on things or on people until we form that trust. You know what I'm saying? Until we see what they are all about before maybe I can go ahead and put some boundaries on them. You know what I'm saying?
That makes sense. Because with the boundaries there is trust that is there, whether it's loaning them money, whether it's loaning a car, being in a relationship, being vulnerable. There are boundaries when it comes to every aspect of your life, no matter what it is that you're dealing with. So you have to have that level of trust there.
And you said loaning money. I'm telling you, like, if you can't pay back my $10, there is no way that I'm going to loan you $100. I'm sorry.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So that's like a little test, you know. If I let you borrow this and then you pay it back, okay, maybe you could come back and ask for a little bit more. But if you didn't pay back the first amount, nah, you ain't getting squat. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. That's true. Let's go ahead and look. We're gonna get, when we can come back from commercial break, we'll go ahead and get into scenario 2. So we'll be back on Words versus Words with Friends podcast.
There's a lot of reasons that the person may not be going to a physical church. One of them could be church hurt. There could be some situations that they have dealt with that keeps them from attending a physical building, and they just want to do online now.
But, you know, I get that, Shemeka, but you know what? We go to our job. We don't have a reason why we skip out on our job. You know what I mean? Because guess what? We're getting paid. How many times do our coworkers hurt us on the job? And guess what? We still show up for our paycheck. I mean, I'm just putting it out there. I'm just saying, because I mean, I've been wronged at my job several times, but guess what? I still show up to work. So to me, not attending church for those reasons would be an excuse.
So that church hurt, I think, is something that goes pretty deep.
Hi, welcome back to Words versus Words with Friends podcast. This was a clip from last week's episode, Excuse versus Explanation. You can check out that full episode on Facebook at WvWWF, or even any major podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And also, I wanted to say we have 14 episodes from season 1. And also from this clip, we also have 2 scenarios that go along with it, total of 3. You can go ahead and check that out.
Yes, that's awesome. So you want to get into scenario 2?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to go into number 2. So we have custody or supervised visitation. So for this scenario, we have the other parent has visitation, but you don't want them to visit the child unsupervised because you don't trust them. Would it be better to have boundaries, or would it be better to have limits?
See, what I see in that scenario is trust. There is a lack of trust. So something happened perhaps in the relationship. Something happened maybe when the person was with your child, that caused some mistrust there. So for me, I would say that there would have to be a limit. There would have to be a limit as to when you're going to visit, how long you're going to visit, what you're going to do.
I think that you should have boundaries when it comes to the visitation, because with boundaries, you want to make sure that the child feels safe, or the children feel safe. They feel like they're not a part of whatever's going on. I think already the child is going to be affected because they're having to go between either the 2 households. Maybe if you're meeting at a facility, they're having to kind of go back and forth. So I think with the boundaries, it helps because it helps the child feel more secure. So the child doesn't really feel that dissension between the 2, the volatile situation or whatever it is, being passed back and forth kind of. So I think it's better to have boundaries in, that type of situation.
I don't, the mistrust, to me, the biggest thing is the trust. You know what I'm saying? When there's boundaries, I think that sometimes people take that for granted. Sometimes they like to stretch that the parameters a little bit, and so maybe sometimes like you can give them an inch and they take a foot. So I think sometimes with boundaries, people just stretch stretch out, I mean, what do you think? I mean, they stretch it out pretty much,
So you think it's better to have limit when it comes to the supervised visitation?
I do until that trust is formed back again. I just think that there's just too much flexibility. I think that sometimes we can negotiate or maybe just compromise, a little bit too much. And I know sometimes it's meeting in the middle, but I think sometimes it's like a rubber band. When you have a rubber band and you keep stretching that rubber band, right? Eventually it's going to lose its elasticity, right? And what's going to happen to that rubber band is going to break. And that's how I see boundaries. I think sometimes when we give too much into boundaries, you know what I mean? That we are stretching it out. And so sometimes I think that we lose our our power, maybe our authority, sometimes even our decisions, because sometimes we feel like we're forced into doing something because we feel obligated that we have to give into what the other person wants.
But I think if you have those boundaries set, when it comes to the children and the visitation, I think it's better to have boundaries that are established so that the child feel more secure. And also going back to respect and trust, like you said, if you have a limit on something, you build on that limit. Maybe they can see them a certain amount of days a week, they can go to a specific place, and then maybe that boundary can widen a little bit because you have developed that trust, and so you trust the person a little bit more, maybe to do more things, and maybe they can do more things than just meeting at that facility. Maybe they could take them out to the park, take them to McDonald's to get something to eat, and so those boundaries start to widen because you have that trust that's been built.
So I mean, for me personally, like the boundary would be like supervised visitation would be the boundary, because now you're within my presence, and I'm able to see what you're doing. Like limit, when it comes to limits, it'd be like absolutely not. Like you can absolutely not have this child without me being there. So I see that as being the limit. And then as far as the boundary, I think it's conditional. Hey, you can do this, you can do this only to this certain point. But when it comes to limits, like I'm not budging. I'm sorry. I'm not.
I get that because I don't have kids, but I get that because you do want to make sure that the child is protected at all times. You have their best interests at heart. That's an adult. They can get over hurt feelings or whatever it is, ego, whatever. When it comes to the child, you want to make sure that they're taken care of. So I get that.
So if you guys are tuning into Facebook, we want to hear your perspective on this. What do you guys think? We're talking about custody and supervised visitation. Would it be better to have boundaries or limits in this scenario? The other parent has visitation, but you don't want them to visit the child unsupervised because you don't trust them. Tiffany, what are your thoughts on that? We know that you're tuning in. What are your thoughts on that? We would love to hear what you have to say. Just think about it. If it was your nephew, if it was your niece, like it doesn't have to be you personally, but it could be somebody it could be a friend's child or something. If they were in that situation, if they were in that position, and you are on the outside looking in, what kind of advice would you give them? Like, would you tell them, hey, you know what, it's best to have boundaries in this situation, or it's best to have limits in this situation? So we definitely want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, because when it comes, I think, because for the boundaries, it does go back to that trust and you feeling comfortable with those situations, or that person being around your child or whoever it is. So yeah.
Okay, we ready to go on to number 3?
I'm ready.
All right. So number 3 says, scenario 3 is forgiveness. Are there boundaries or limits when it comes to forgiveness? Ooh, this is touchy, because I think we've all been placed into a situation where we've had to forgive somebody. So I think this just applies to anybody and everybody.
Yes, I do too. And we have a scripture for that one. So we have Matthew 18:21 and 22. And so for 21, it says, Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? And for 22, it says, Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. So, Joe, when I hear this scripture, I immediately, when I hear the 70 times 7, I hear endless multiple times that we forgive over and over and over again. The reason why is because Christ forgives us over and over and over again. So I think when it comes to forgiveness, the way that Jesus has it designed, there are no boundaries. Now, us as a human, I see it a little bit differently because I think we do have boundaries when it comes to forgiveness. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I think when it comes to that, a lot of times we place limits, on people because they've wronged us, they've hurt our feelings or they've done something. And so sometimes it's very hard to get past it, and we place those limits and say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to talk to that person anymore because they did me dirty, they did me wrong. Instead of, we know that love is unconditional. We know that forgiveness should be unconditional. But so many times we place those limits on people.
Yeah, and I think with forgiveness, the boundary, I think it actually coincides with forgiveness. Now, we're talking the human perspective. We know that Christ, there is no boundary, there is no limit. But as a human, I think we place boundaries on it. And I think sometimes it's healthy to a certain extent, because the reason why is if you forgive a person, you forgive them, but that does not mean that you have to constantly be around them. Whatever situation it is that happened, I don't know. There's so many different ones. I think depending on the scenario and what happened, you might have to cut contact. And I think with that is a boundary within the forgiveness that you've given the person.
But if we place those boundaries, right, and we say, and we cut that person off, are we truly, really forgiving them?
Well, okay. So for example, okay. So let's say that you're in a relationship, okay? Someone does you wrong, okay? And you forgive that person. Y'all aren't together anymore. You're not going to be around them anymore because you're not together. But that doesn't mean that you did not forgive the person. You see what I'm saying? So if you came back around them, you would be okay. You could speak and be cordial. But since you're not in that relationship anymore, then you're not going to be around them constantly anymore.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You're not going to totally cut them off. You're still going to walk in love. I mean, you're not just going to be like, hey, you know what? I'm done with you. And you're never going to see my face again. I'm not going to talk to you. If you need help, don't even call me. I mean, that's how some people are.
So we have a comment from the producer. He says, when dealing with forgiveness, biblically speaking, it is a reset. So there are no limits, but there could be boundaries, especially when you have people who are intentionally hurting you. Yes, that is very true. When you have to respect yourself and establish some of those, because you don't want to continually be hurt over and over again. So I think it's very healthy for you to have some boundaries when it comes to forgiving someone. I do.
It goes back. It does go back to trust again, but I like that. I like that word reset. It's like you're wiping the slate clean and you're starting all over again. And so that's hard for a lot of people to do that. It's hard to say, you know what, I'm not going to, and it just simply means, even though the person wronged you, I'm not going to constantly keep bringing it up. Sure, we're not going to forget it's there, but we're not going to hold that against the other person. And so many times, you know what I'm saying, we place those limits on people, and that's truly not it's truly not forgiving them, because if you did, you would reset, you would wipe that slate clean and give them another chance. Just like in the scripture, does that mean you gonna continually give them another chance? Does forgiveness mean I'm gonna keep giving you chance and chance over and over and over again?
But I think that the boundaries are gonna look different. Even each person is gonna look different. because I think that we process things differently. And I hate to bite off of someone that you and I both know,
Mm,
but I have a friend who says that with forgiveness, there is a reset. I
mm,
had never really looked at it that way. I know some people who can like seriously mentally like reset, like almost like it
yeah.
never happened.
Mhm,
And I've known some people who have been able to do that, and I think that is awesome because
mhm,
I really feel like that's exactly what the Lord does. Of course, He forgets it. It's as far as the east is from the west. You know what
mhm,
I mean? So I think when you hear that reset, it takes me to that scripture, because it
mhm,
does. It is totally wiped out and you start over anew. And I think that if we can start to look at forgiveness as a reset
mm.
for us and for the other person, I
Yes.
think that it would be very helpful and it would help us to be able to forgive more easily.
Yeah, that is so good and that is so true, and
Mhm.
I mean, like you said, I mean, I look up to that. I really do. I look up to, you know, I know who you're talking about, and it's so true. I look up to this person because it was the first time I seen it. I was like, "What?" I mean, I kind of like messed up, and sometimes I feel so bad when I mess up. But
Mhm.
he's just like, "Hey, it's okay." It's like, "Oh, that's no big deal. That's no problem." And then we go about like nothing has ever happened. And to me, that's like so admirable, that, he's able to do that, so
Mhm.
it's not easy. And I think sometimes I think it comes with just your mindset. And I think
Yes.
it comes with changing mindset. The Bible talks about that all the time, renewing of the mind. You have to renew your mind constantly. And you can't hold
Mhm.
things against people because imagine if God held things against some of the things that we did, you know?
Yes.
And yet we have a struggle, we have a problem when it comes to letting things go, when people
Yes.
do us wrong.
And you're so right, Joe. When it comes to that, it is all about the mindset. That's one reason why I love this show, doing this with you, because with the different perspectives, the way that we look at things, guess what we're doing? We are resetting our mind. We are having a different mindset. We are trying to become more like Christ so that we can live a better life and we can
Mhm.
show love to everyone. We can easily forgive at the drop of a hat and it's not even a problem. Just like you said, if something happens, oh well, it's okay, let's try again. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, that's why I just love it. I love doing this with you because it just helps bring out that perspective and it helps me to look at things differently.
It's a level of maturity, we had a comment
Mm.
up here earlier. If you can go ahead and put that back up, please. Forgiveness is a choice for us. Is a choice for us, but a mandate from God. Definitely. Oh
Mhm.
yeah. So God, I mean, it's a command. It's a
Yes.
command. God commands us to forgive. I mean, you know, it really
Mhm.
just goes a long way, just forgiving somebody just really just goes a long way.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I like that so much. Yeah, we gotta stop placing limits, I think, when it comes to that. And
Yeah.
I think giving them boundaries is a lot more healthy. And it's
Mhm.
a lot more healthy, and it will establish that trust. So if you've lost trust in somebody, in order to get it back, start with boundaries, where you be able
Mhm.
to build that trust again. Because I think if we just start cutting people off when they wrong us, we're not going to
Mhm.
learn to have healthy relationships. We're not going to learn how to mend, we're not going to learn how to restore and to fix broken relationships. What are we going to do? We're
Yes.
just going to go on to the next relationship, meet the next person, establish a relationship. When they do us wrong, we're gonna cut them off. Like that's not the right thing to do.
Yeah, and that way, if we can learn to forgive quickly, then we can go ahead and move on. We can
Mm,
learn that lesson, pass that test, and the next person that we're in relationship with, friendship with, co-worker with, we don't
mm,
have to carry that same baggage and we can look at things differently. It is all about the mindset. It's that
yes.
choice to decide that I'm going to change my mindset. I'm going to look at it a different way. I have a different perspective and I'm going to react differently because of that.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. That is so true. Definitely
Mhm.
true. I had a thought. I was gonna say something. and I lost it.
You did.
It was right there in my mind. Oh yeah. Scripture. It says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath.
Yes.
Don't go to bed angry, because what happens if that other person does not wake up? If something happens to the other person, how are you going to feel? You're going to feel convicted, and then you had bitterness in your heart and you had unforgiveness in your heart. You know what I'm saying? So I just encourage people, if you're watching, I encourage you just to build strong relationships with people who have done you wrong. Don't be so quick to cut them off. Don't be so quick to react out of anger. Don't go to bed angry with somebody. You know what I'm saying? Just walk in forgiveness and walk in love. I mean, that for me, that's my advice to you. You know what I'm saying? So I would say, establish boundaries first. You establish boundaries first, and you can earn that. They can earn that trust back. You'll be able to build a stronger relationship.
Yes, and you don't want to burn those bridges, because you know what? You don't burn those bridges because you never know when you got to cross back over that same bridge. I had somebody that says, keep it straight as you go. Basically, if someone wrongs you, you need to forgive them, let it go, move on, and keep going. Because guess what? You want that same forgiveness. You want God to continue to forgive you, so you want to give that same forgiveness to other people as well, because we're human and we are definitely not perfect.
That's very well said. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap it up. Shemeka, do you have any last comments?
So last comments, boundary and limit. These are very healthy to have. It's very healthy to have boundaries for yourself. You have to have that self-respect for yourself. It's okay to say no. It's okay to have those boundaries that are healthy, because you are being very respectful to you and to the other person. We want to thank you so much tonight for joining us. We appreciate your support, all of your feedback. You can follow me on Facebook at Shemeka Montgomery. You can also follow me on Instagram at Mika Lives.
And you can follow me at Joeleen Vasquez, both on Facebook and Instagram. And also you can follow us on Words vs. Words with Friends podcast on Facebook at WvWWF. And we also have a brand new Instagram page, WvWWF podcast. So we encourage you to go ahead and follow. You can listen to past episodes on any major podcast platform, such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. So guys, we will see you next Friday at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we thank you once again. And we want you to know that Words vs. Words with Friends podcast is more than a discussion. It's a debate. You've been watching Words vs. Words with Friends podcast, brought to you by Next 15 Podcast Productions. If you would like to support the podcast, go to next15podcast.com and click the Buy Me Coffee tab, where we will receive your donations of any size. Thank you in advance and for watching the podcast. We will see you next week.